Hi, it's James here, Past Force. Is that the props department? Hi. I requested a peach for a skit, and what you sent me is... Uh, well, it's not exactly ideal. There's a shortage of peaches. Of course there's a shortage of peaches. Okay, so how am I supposed to recreate Call Me By Your Name with a tin of peach slices? I'm not even going to dignify that with an answer.
I have loved you for the last time. Is it a video? Is it a video? I have touched you for the last time.
Later. The words, the voice, the attitude. I'd never heard anyone use later to say goodbye before. It sounded harsh, curse and dismissive, spoken with the veiled indifference of people who may not care to see or hear from you again. It is the first thing I remember about him, and I can hear it still today. Later. The beginning of the book. Later. Later. Meaning goodbye. Interesting way to start a book with a word meaning goodbye. Elio is perplexed by this use of the word later. He doesn't understand it. He's never heard it used in this context before. So that said, where does it come from? The use of the word later to mean goodbye. It's a contraction, obviously, a contraction of see you later. So where does see you later come from? See you later, alligator? Teen slang of the 1950s? Well, that's actually older than the 1950s. The American Dictionary of Clichés dates that to the 19th century, and the OED traces it to 1878 and an article in the Harvard Lampoon. But later, as a contraction. Well, the earliest usage of this is in Time magazine in 1954. Which, does suggest perhaps an earlier usage, but by the time of Call Me By Your Name, it's been in use for 30 years. 30 years, Elio. 30 years. Then came that July Sunday afternoon when our house suddenly emptied, and we were the only ones there, and fire tore through my guts. Because fire was the first and easiest word that came to me, later that same evening when I tried to make sense of it in my diary. I'd waited and waited in my room, pinioned to my bed in a trance-like state of terror and anticipation. Not a fire of passion, not a ravaging fire, but something paralysing, like the fire of cluster bombs that suck up the oxygen around them and leave you panting because you've been kicked in the gut, and a vacuum has ripped up every living lung tissue and dried your mouth, and you hope nobody speaks, because you can't talk, and you pray no one asks you to move, because your heart is clogged and beats so fast it would sooner spit out shards of glass than let anything else flow through its narrow chambers. Fire, like fear, like panic. Like one more minute of this and I'll die if he doesn't knock at my door. But I'd sooner he never knock than knock now. I'd learned to leave my French windows ajar and I'd lie on my bed, wearing only my bathing suit, my entire body on fire, Fire, like a pleading that says, please, please tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I've imagined all this. Because it can't possibly be true for you as well. And if it's true for you too, you're the cruelest man alive. Heraclitus, the philosopher's philosopher. He is the reason Oliver is in Italy. He is the reason Oliver is writing a book. Known, as I said, as the philosopher's philosopher, and he is one of those historians we know fuck all about. Literally, there's nothing about him out there, and his work only survives as quotations. Makes you wonder how Oliver could actually write a full book on Heraclitus. I mean, wow. Picking a niche subject like that? That's pretentious. That's so up itself. It's like picking a topic like, I don't know, films made in Wales for your PhD. Heraclitus believed in something called the unity of opposites, whereby things, objects are brought into being by contradiction. In other words, opposites attract. Kind of like Oliver and Elio, I guess, in the book. He also said that change is the principle of all things. Oh, and there was fire as well. There was lots and lots of fire. He liked to burn things, apparently, did Heraclitus. Burning. Burning with desire like Elio's soul. But later was also a way of avoiding saying goodbye, of making light of all goodbyes. You said later, not to mean farewell, but to say you'd be back in no time. It was the equivalent of his saying, just a sec, when my mother once asked him to pass the bread, and he was busy pulling apart the fish bones on his plate. Just a sec. My mother, who hated what she called his Americanisms, ended up calling him Il Cowboy, the cowboy. It started as a put-down and soon enough became an endearment to go along with her other nickname for him, conferred during his first week, when he came down to the dinner table after showering. His glistening hair combed back. La Star, she had said, short for La Movie Star. So, let's get on with the reason you clicked this video. You want to know if I found a real Oliver and Elio living, having an affair, having a gay romance in Italy in 1983. Sorry to disappoint you, but no. I looked, I couldn't find any. Okay, I didn't look that hard, but I'm sure there was someone having like a hot, gay summer romance in Tuscany, in Italy, in 1983, but I couldn't find them. So what was it like being gay in Italy in 1983? Same-sex activity had been legal in Tuscany since 1853, and it had been legal in the rest of Italy since about 1890, which is much, much sooner than the rest of Europe. It's one of the reasons why Oscar Wilde, after being released from Reading jail, could go to Naples. There is a story told by, I think it's Graham Greene, about his father and uncle visiting Naples, and they're sat at this cafe, and this man comes over and starts chatting to them, and he says, "Oh, I'll get you drinks." So he gets them their drinks, and they have a nice time, they have a lovely chat, and then the guy basically says, Great, it's been nice talking to you. Bye. Leaves without paying. And then one of them says to the other, hey, you know who that was, don't you? Oscar Wilde. I think that's in one of Graham Greene's autobiographies. I think it's... oh god, I can't remember the name of it now. I'll put a thingy down here. But it's in, I think, one of his autobiographies. Of course, when Mussolini and the fascisti come along in the 1920s, they do attempt to recriminalise same-sex activity. But they're not very successful at it. So it seems that homosexuality, being gay, was tolerated in Italy far earlier than in the rest of Europe. Tolerated, yes, and only to a very limited degree, because you've got to remember, Italy, Italy was no queertopia, especially in the 1960s, the 70s, and even into the 80s. Because you've got to remember, Italy was, and still is, a very Catholic country. If Italy was at one point more tolerant than the rest of Europe, it's far less so these days. Well, there's been recent news articles about how the right-wing government of Italy are attempting to ban surrogacy for gay couples. It's not a happy time to be gay in Italy at the minute. Which is strange, because at the same time, two of the great queer romances of the last decade have been set in Italy. Call Me By Your Name and Luca. In the 60s and 70s and the 80s though, Italy was still no queertopia, as I keep saying. Which brings me to the filmmaker, Pier Paolo Pasolini. Pier Paolo Pasolini, one of the great world filmmakers. Grungy, realistic style. Groundbreaking style in his portrayal of sexuality and gender and sex. Not always, not at the beginning of his career, because at the beginning of his career, you know, he was still a bit earthy, still a bit grungy, in films like Mamma Roma. It's a very good film, by the way. It's a very good film. It's about a prostitute. Okay, his work was always about sex, but there was always this sort of religious dimension to it, this Catholic, religious, non-secular dimension. He made a film of the Gospel of St. Matthew, which was praised by the Vatican as a great biblical film. But Pasolini was no devout Catholic. Pasolini was most certainly not a devout Catholic. Pasolini, I believe, was an atheist. He was also openly gay, which it comes through in his films, it comes through in his poems. His last film, Salo, or the 120 Days of Sodom, it's called the most debauched film ever made. And that's not just because of the gay stuff in it. Let's just say, brings a whole new meaning to the term eat shit. But he also made a documentary, 1964, Comizi d'amore, I think, or Love Meetings, in which he travelled around Italy interviewing various people in a sort of vox pop style to ask what they thought about various sexual issues. You know, the sort of thing like divorce, marriage, feminism, where babies come from. Jesus gives them to the stork, apparently. This is 1964 as well, as the permissive society is taking hold in Britain. And it seems from the film like the same thing is happening in Italy. There seems to be this division between the old and the young, where the older generation think there's far too much sex about these days and far too little shame. Younger Italians in general seem to be much more free and much more open about sex and sexual issues than their older counterparts. And there also seems to be a geographical division as well between the richer north and the poorer south as well. The poorer south, areas like Calabria, Sicily, they're much more traditional, much more old-fashioned in their outlook. And of course, Pasolini asks about the homosexuality as well. What do Italians think of homosexuality? 35 minutes in, this comes up. And the segment, I'd say, lasts about 15 minutes. He interviews about 10 different people in that time. And very few of them are positive opinions on homosexuality, on being gay. The first person he interviews is an old man who says that all men in their own way are abnormal. But when he's asked more directly about homosexuality, he sort of gets a bit nervous and starts avoiding the subject. Then there's this lady in a dance hall who hopes her children won't turn out to be gay. This guy says he feels revulsion. He says it's not natural. He's revolted by the idea. Then there's these two who claim that sexy closet gays are impossible. I mean, I suppose before the 27th of March this year, hiya, sexy closet gay. Oh, and one of them also says she would try and cure her gay children. The only two who even show any remote positivity about homosexuality are these two old professors who Pasolini interviews at the end of the segment. Otherwise, there is not a positive opinion to be found. This film is one of the important social documents of 20th century Italy, 20th century Italian society. But it says something very different to the legal context of homosexuality in Italy. How Mussolini didn't manage to criminalise it, how it was appeared to be tolerated, how it was legal before the rest of Europe. it says something very different. It says that in the 1960s, homosexuality was taboo in Italy. Well, when Pasolini came to make Salo in the mid-70s, he never saw it released, because after finishing the film, and it might have been because of the film that this happened, Pasolini was murdered in Rome in what is believed to be a homophobic attack. Pasolini was murdered most likely because he was gay. What is a berm? The moon's nearly full tonight. A berm. B-E-R-M. It's it's really important in the novel because, well, Oliver Elio. What does happen? It's something to do with Oliver and Elio's relationship. I think it's like where Elio confesses he's... Sorry, it's been like a week since I finished reading it. I'm gonna have to look this up. I'm sorry. Bear with me. This is a really important scene in the book. This is where Oliver and Elio have their first kiss. But what is a berm? Well, it's a sort of ridge, a bit of high ground along the side of a river or a road or a canal. It's basically a hill by the side of a road. Hardly the most romantic of places. Claude Monet, French Impressionist painter, travelled to Italy in 1884, in February of that year. He described it as a fairy tale land with a magical aspect. But he was tired, he overworked himself while he was in Italy. And he said at the end of it, I can't wait to pack my suitcase and go. Still, he painted 45 paintings whilst he was in Bordighera, Italy, one of the possible locations for B in the book and the film. And those 45 paintings include this one, which was painted from a berm. I began to rub myself, thinking of no one and of everyone, including the poor peach, which had no idea what was being done to it, except that it had to play along and probably in the end took some pleasure in the act as well, till I thought I heard it say to me, "Fuck me, Elio. Fuck me harder." And after a moment, "Harder," I said, while I scanned my mind for images from Ovid. Wasn't there a character who had turned into a peach, and if there wasn't, couldn't I make one up on the spot? Say, an ill-fated young man and young girl who, in their peachy beauty, had spawned an envious deity who had turned them into a peach tree, and only now, after 3,000 years, were being given what had been so unjustly taken away from them, as they had murmured, "I'll die when you're done, and you mustn't be done. Must never be done." Okay, so I can't exactly find a trace of a peach in Ovid, but this website here, Call Me By Your Name 6 Hidden Greek Myths, points to the myth of Apollo and Daphne, where Daphne gets transformed into a laurel tree and Apollo, mad with desire, basically makes love to the tree. think that's a bit of a stretch. I think if I do find a reference to a peaching Ovid, I'll let you know. I'll let you know.
I have loved you for the last time. Is it a video? Is it a video? I have touched you for the last time. Is it a video? Is it a video? For the love, for laughter, I flew up to your arms. Is it a video? Is it a video? For the love, for laughter, I flew up to your arms. Is it a video? Is it a video?